call the Willits City Council special meeting to order this June 27th at 9:37 a.m. And we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Thank you. Roll call.
Councilmember Strong?
I can't hear you, Dolores.
Councilmember Strong?
Here.
Gonzalez?
Present.
Stransky?
Yes.
Connie? Mayor Rodriguez?
Yes. The first order of business is to ratify and extend for an additional 30 days our virtual City Council Commission and Committee meetings pursuant to AB 361. I'll entertain a motion.
I will move.
I so move. Gonzalez seconds.
Thank you. All right, we have a first and a second. Any further comments? Anybody from the public? Call for the vote.
Councilmember Strong?
Yes.
Gonzalez?
Yes.
Stransky?
Yes.
Mayor Rodriguez?
Yes. All right, moving along to discussion and possible adoption or action to adopt the fiscal year 2022 to 2024 biannual budget, including the capital improvement program. At the June 13th budget workshop, the City Council completed the review of the documents and instructed staff to present it for final action at the June 22nd meeting. Staff was unable to complete the requested revisions in time for inclusion on the June 22nd agenda and subsequently scheduled this special meeting. Our presenting staff member will be City Manager Brian Bender. And we lost Brian. I'm going to turn it over to Manuel Orozco.
Thank you, Mayor. City Manager, when he gets back, and also council members. This morning, I'm once again bringing before you the updated proposed biannual budget for the City of Willits, along with corresponding resolutions for the operating budget and the CIP budget. These resolutions will be providing the approval of the appropriations for the operating budget and will allow staff to record non-cash transactions, provide for transfers, and record the capitalization of assets as stated through the generally accepted accounting principles, also known as GAAP. This also allows for the carryover of appropriations so as to complete already approved projects from past council actions. By allowing for encumbrances, we can track funding and adhere to the budget to better serve the city's needs. For all these changes, they're designed to not allow for the increase of appropriations outside of council's direction unless it is an administrative movement that is consistent with council's direction. So I'm going to ask Dolores to pull up the presentation now. And for example, like Measure K, it is used for the needs of the city operations. However, council wanted us to track Measure K funding outside of the general fund to ensure accountability for the use of these funds. As we move forward throughout the year, part of our reporting on the fiscal health of the city will be the tracking of Measure K funding. Once the report is made and accepted by council, transfers will be made from the general fund, to the general fund from Measure K to record the use. This will provide for the consistency of tracking of the use of Measure K funding. And so with that, as for the resolutions, it formally accepts the CIP plan as presented to council on August 23rd of last year and implements 2 years of appropriations to enact that plan. As time progresses and as we provide the next biennial budget, staff will update the plan and provide the suggested appropriations for the next 2 years in accordance with the updated CIP plan. Next slide, please.
Quick question.
Of course.
This is probably for city manager. I was reading over the Measure K that we passed, and I thought that I read something in there that said that we're supposed to be having a citizen oversight committee. Do you have any information on that?
That is correct, Madam Mayor. There's a couple of items that are associated with the Measure K passage and functionality. We talked about this at a previous meeting as well. There's a couple of key components to Measure K that the city needs to, or obligations we need to fulfill. But we're not quite there yet. We need a complete audit and have this budget in place. Once we do that, then we can form the oversight committee. We're still out on our audit, so that's going to hold us back a little bit as well. As was communicated when this was first brought up at a previous meeting, we'll do the best we can, but we need to get the budget adopted, and then that gives Manny one of the key cornerstones in our Measure K performance review, and then we can proceed with the audits. Manny has told me that we're both in agreement that once this budget is adopted, then it's turn and burn on the audits, and then we can convene that committee.
Okay. Thank you for the reminder, and that was also a public question, so I wanted to make sure that they were aware. I'll turn it back over to our Manny.
Okay, next slide, please. So after the draft of the budget was sent to council, staff took questions and comments from council regarding the budget appropriations, transfers, FTE formatting, and narratives through either email or through the budget workshop. What is presented today is the result of those changes in the draft, and I've listed these changes in this presentation. I'll read them out line by line. So we adjusted the appropriation mix of Department 1020. This is continued. Can you go back one slide? So, okay, so the change is made. So full-time equivalent summary was adjusted to represent a department perspective. This was a suggestion by Madge. Additionally, narratives are now include a breakdown of the FTE by department. We also made an adjustment to FTEs in the Community Development Department, moving the Code Enforcement Officer from Department to Department 1011, and adjusting the forecasting assumption on the staff costs, which reduced the appropriations within the Community Development Department, and also the water and sewer funds. We also added appropriations to the emergency services for an additional contractor, as suggested by Councilmember Gonzalez. We added appropriations to planning to include GIS contracts and also including the safety and land use element in the general plan. Next slide, please. We adjusted the appropriation mix in Department 1012. We adjusted appropriations in Department 1015 to include the addition of other contracts for an electrical engineer. We updated the language on the budget narratives for Departments 1010, 1011, 1012, and 1015 to better represent what's going on within those departments. We added an oil reservoir removal / mitigation project to the narrative within Department 1030. We corrected the engineering allocation amount for Department 1042 in fiscal year 22-23. We removed the appropriations for the capital improvement CIP titled California Penn Project that was in Fund 501. Next slide. We changed the appropriations for the existing engineering allocation from a debit to a credit. That was reversed. We adjusted the transfers out and transfers in from funds 500, 501, 503, 400, 401, 403, and 410 to ensure that the proper amounts are contributing to the projects that will be housed in one place to ensure the proper fiscal facilitation of each CIP project for capitalization. We retitled Fund 265 to reflect its proper title as a successor agency to the Community Development Commission. We inserted Fund 420 into the general plan project to budget the account for these costs. And we also made the creation of a pie chart illustrating the expenditure breakdown by department and attached the charts. The attached charts correspond to that as well. So next slide. Okay, so a question was made during the budget workshop on the pie charts and their origin and how they linked to page 10. So I created this chart in hopes of showing the link. The brackets denote the consolidation of each slice of the pie chart within the council, with council, finance, HR, IT, pool operations, and community services standing alone. Admin, legal, contingencies, CalPERS, liability, and the election departments consolidate into the administration slice. Planning, code enforcement, cannabis, building safety and maintenance is put into the community development slice. And the public works and police department slices are part of that whole. You can see that there's, it's pretty obvious which ones are which. And so you can see the consolidation from those departments into those slices as well. Next slide, please. The next two slides, I have the updated numbers on the pie charts to reflect the updated biannual budget. Just slight increases and decreases here and there. And this is for 23, 20. Oh, we went ahead too. Back up. There we go.
Sorry.
It's for 22, 23.
Go to that one.
Showing the breakdown of each of the different departments, as I said, consolidated. And then the next slide is for the year after. And next slide. With that, I'll take your questions.
Councilmember Strong?
Yeah, one question. I'd love to see a little of an explanation, especially for the public, but would help to remind me also of exactly what overhead and administration is. That's the general funds. Well, anyway, I'd like an explanation of that in the budget document, and then similarly, transfers out. Exactly what does that include? And those were just helpful. There's several places in the budget where an explanation of those would be helpful.
Okay, on page 16 for the explanation of general administration itself, it is coordination of legal services, management and coordination of all cities, policies, programs, services, negotiation and management of contracts that interface with the local governments and regulatory agencies, the state and federal agencies. And that is listed all the way in that particular segment right there, along with the program goals and the allocated positions associated with that organization. Further along down the line, down the page of page 16, you can see the budget line item by common details. You can see what is specifically assigned to each of the line items so that people understand what it is that we're paying for line item by line item. After that, then you'll see the administration side of those expenses. When it comes to the pie slices, it has to do with each one of those individual items. So after administration, you have legal services, which was included in that particular pie slice, and its description is on page 20.
Okay, I think you're probably right that it's all there, but it doesn't pop out in plain language. When you're looking at these headings, and I'm not really finding. I think it's just hard to find it in layman's terms what that is. But anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember Gonzalez?
Manny, two questions. I know we had chatted before and we talked about reserves and how have a plan moving forward as we progress through the next couple of years, building them back up. Where would I find the reserves in the budget? And then the other question I had was under Department 1070, Community Services, I noticed a certain amount this year and then next year that drops down, and I was wondering what the logic was. Just those are my initial questions.
All right, so for the first part, the contingency section in Department 1097, that would be considered part of the an amount that's set aside for any contingencies that may occur throughout the year. Keeping within a balanced budget, we want to be able to have the ability to be able to move appropriations if necessary. And then afterwards, what I'd hope to do is during the following year, adopt a reserve policy that we can all go over and work towards putting monies aside for contingency reserves, for for various different reserves as we plan ahead in the future. And so that's something that we want to have a conversation with council about later on for direction after the year's end.
Do we have a specific line item for reserves in general, and what page would that be? Just
that would be on page 68. Right after 1070.
okay, so our reserves had dropped down quite a bit then. It's right our question.
Yeah, well, so this is not what you would call reserves per se. These are the amounts left over within our operating budget that is over the amount that we are asking for. So we're putting those as a part of contingency. As for reserves, we can't totally account for the amount that we have in reserves as of yet because not all the information has been entered in or the audit's been completed. So as for us working with ADP, we have entries that need to be made from the ADP system over to our accounts in the ACS system. And so that's causing us to have a little bit of ambiguity of where we are at in terms of our fund balances, which then hinders our ability to tell what our reserves are at the moment. That's why it's very important for us to catch up.
More to follow, and then plan is to, as a council and city, we will move forward on our reserves. Okay, sir, thank you.
Yes. And as for your second question, the drop down, we have put in the money there, but I'll leave it to Brian in order to be able to talk a little bit about why the drop downs occurred. We didn't want to, well, I'll just leave it to Brian. Discuss that particular part, where it goes from 10,000 to 5,000.
Where is that item?
That item would be on page 67.
What was the question? I didn't quite hear it.
Well, I saw that on year 22-23, we were $10,000 across the board for each of the asks. And then for 23-24, it dropped 5,000. Obviously, the 10,000 is a step up from what we provided before because of our budgetary issues. So I just wanted to know why 10,000 this year versus 5,000. What's the rationale?
Are you referring to the community services allocations? Okay, so that's a good point. So this might be an opportunity to have some general discussion on that. When we were composing the budget, we had several options. We have received requests from those groups asking for additional outlay. They have suffered pretty severely from COVID activities on their operations, and they definitely need some financial support. As you track through previous budget allocations, the city was much more, we had a much more favorable balance towards them, and we're trying to reestablish that. So this is just a model we plugged into the budget right now. It's a 10 and then it drops down as kind of a bridge to where they were, both COVID and then where the city allocated additional resources. The other component that's in this mixture is ARPA funds. We can do a one-time contribution through ARPA to these charity or community organizations. So, we program the numbers kind of a baseline as they are. And our explanation is it's kind of a quick infusion of operating cash or operating funds to these community organizations to get them going, get them started after COVID. And it's also recognizing that the city is coming out of, where we were with lack of Measure K funding and our solid financial footing right now. So that's where those numbers are, and that's the model. Now, once again, that's what we programmed into the budget. The council can say that you want to even it out over the next 2 years, or you can do a one-time contribution through ARPA to offset any contribution that you want to make through the budget.
And so what you're saying is the 10,000 would reflect our ARPA contribution, or does not?
No, that would be straight general fund activity right now. So, like I said, we program 10,000 in there now. We can, if the council so chooses, we can drop it to 5,000, so it's a less of a hit on our general fund and compensate from 5,000 to ARPA. Or you can do whatever balance that you want. You could do 2,000 from general and 4,000 from ARPA funds. We just programmed, we ran the numbers. We think it's a fair offering to these community services that some of them are, like I said, have been impacted by COVID activities for the last 2.5 years, and are still trying to get their financial footing.
I support it, but I'm just curious, do we need to spend down that ARPA funds early on, and are we better off, this amount, but 5,000 out of general fund and the rest out of ARPA? Or is there a pressing need to spend down that ARPA fund within a certain period of time?
No. We have a general plan now for ARPA, and that's kind of programmed into it. But right now, they're all placeholders in that scheme. There's no rigid allocations that have been decided. Obviously, those will come to the council almost as a separate mini budget and a work plan, and that would be programmed into those to those requests.
Thank you.
Councilmember Strong?
Yes, on that subject, I have some other questions too, but on that page 67, I kind of agree with the rationale that Brian was just presenting, that in a sense these are one-time contributions or one-time increase in contributions to kind of help them get their footing. And in most cases, I feel like all those are very worthy causes, and that explains why it's more in 22-23 than it is in 23-24. So, yeah, we could fiddle with those numbers, but I think those are generally pretty good. I was just also wondering on that page, on the Chamber of Commerce, it's based on a percent of sale of a TOT tax, and under the revenues, the TOT wasn't going up a whole lot from 21-22. It was low in 2021 according to the revenue chart, but it didn't jump that much in years 22-23 and 23-24. So I'm wondering if those numbers, the 50,000 that's indicated there, is actually just based on the projected percent of TOT revenue, because it looks like a big jump.
Well, it's based off that agreement, which sunsets at the end of the month, and we need to roll into a new agreement. And we have reached out to the chamber. I will continue that effort. So basically, it's an allocation agreed upon between the city council and the chamber on what percentage is allocated from TOT receipts and applied to the chamber for their activities.
Okay, well, then the numbers aren't accurate based on TOT revenue projections.
No, it's a standalone. It's basically, it's what the agreement says is what they receive.
Okay.
My prior years represented two assumptions. One was the assumption of where what TOT was going to be landing at, and the other assumption, one was like I'm not exactly certain where the actual amounts were that they came up with in order to be able to do the TOTs for those years. They seem to stay and remain consistent. However, in this particular side of the transaction, the community center, they were expecting, or maybe expecting, a lot less, and so the percentages reflect that. The amounts that we have currently on there are the agreed upon amounts that we projected out that would be paid out if we received that amount in budget. And of course, if there is more that is received in TOT, then we deliver more out based on the agreement.
Well, as long as you understand, my question about that is that if we're projecting based on the revenue actually received from TOT in the prior years, it looks like the 50,000 is more than we anticipate we're going to get for their percentage. But if that's sort of a placeholder and the amount they actually get will depend on the actual TOT revenue, then I'm okay to have it be a placeholder. But yeah,
that's correct.
Well, yeah, once again, it's also based on that agreement that will need to be reviewed in the next month or 2 or 3. So that it's a placeholder in the budget, that's correct. But also the council will have the opportunity to review agreement and decide what that percentage of receipt they will receive.
okay, thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor Connie arrived a few minutes late and she has a question.
Good morning. Thank you. Yes, I also have a question about the community services. I'm glad that Madge brought up the question about the Chamber of Commerce funds. And Brian, you mentioned that the agreement with them regarding this percentage of TOT taxes comes up at the end of the month. I'd be very curious to hear the results of that conversation. I just continue to have reservations about whether this is a good use of taxpayer funds. I'm unclear exactly what the chamber delivers to either the business community or the community as a whole. I do feel like these other community members offer a lot of value, and I'm very happy to see us giving extra this year to help them out. I'm fine with the extra boost for 22-23 and then getting back down to kind of more historical levels in 23-24. The other question I have is regarding, Brian, you mentioned there's a general plan for the ARPA funds. Will there be a time when that will be presented to council so we can get the lay of what your general plan is for that funding?
The plan is to present that to the council in draft form for initial consideration. Probably we're looking at the beginning of August. And most of the elements right now are efforts that would reduce any burdens on general funds. So park maintenance, park improvements, facility improvements, some planning activity. So that's what we're looking at. So there's the guidelines for our allocations have opened up a little bit, and communities are using it across the board. Our general concept here for the city is to anything that would have been funded through general fund activity, we want to use ARPA funds to bridge that or to extend general fund activity, to lessen the strain on general fund activity, and by that measure K.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, I would agree. I'd expressed concern that we have an item in here to continue with the Chamber of Commerce as well as EDFC. I know that we have a member that serves on EDFC and we get information, but in terms of taxpayer dollars and benefits for our community, we haven't, to be honest, we haven't seen many of our local businesses using EDFC services. So I'm a little concerned about a significant increase to them without knowing that there's been some direct support here, because from what I've seen, it's been minimal. And as long as this is a placeholder and we're going to have conversations about the chamber and EDFC at a later date, I'd be fine with approving the budget. The others I have no issues with. All right. Any other questions? I see Councilmember Strong. Go ahead.
So is this a good time to just go, for me to go and look at the questions I had page by page? None of these are big items, but I just wanted a few questions answered. Is this a good time to do that?
Are they questions that you didn't get answered yet, Matt, or?
Well, I mean, I was only able to look at them, but yeah, they are, in addition to the ones we've already talked about. I looked at it over the weekend, and this is Monday morning, so I didn't have a chance to talk to staff on they're minor things, but I just want to make sure that they, if possible, that I understand them before we adopt the actual budget. Can I just go?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
On page 18, the Office Assistant 3 says 1.35 positions for both years. And I was wondering, does that mean we have 2 Office Assistant 3s and 0.65 of their time is somewhere else in the budget? Is that what that is? Because I didn't know we had that many Office Assistants.
Right now, it's the accountant positions that are underfilling. It's the office assistants are underfilling the accountant positions that were previously approved. And the idea behind it is that the undertaking we're doing right now is to try and grow staffing in order to be able to help them understand the roles and the responsibilities necessary to be able to provide or do a budget or do work on the audits themselves, do fiscal year end closes, understand the processes behind payroll, and also understand the process behind facilitating a CIP program so as to make sure that we keep funding taken care of. So part of that is, that. I mean, it's us being able to underfill those positions and then continue forward with growing those, growing in those efforts.
So you're basically allocating 2 positions there that aren't both filled right now, but you're allocating that. Is that right?
Yes, and the reasoning behind that, and there's more to that as well, because there's also positions that are being allocated. There's three office assistant and accountant positions at the moment, and only 1.35 is actually being impacted on the general fund side under the finance section. The others are going to the various places like the airport enterprise fund and the sewer enterprise fund, water enterprise fund, because they do activities that are associated with that, and that's the reasoning for that. So if you go and look prior to that, if you look at the breakdown of the FTE staff or the change in FTE staff, which is on page, that would be page 9. The reasonings behind that, so you can have a look at each different position, each particular position throughout the whole entire budget, but you're seeing them in the home department in which they live in. So it's not broken out by FTE, so as it's broken out by a home department. So the person facilitating the supervision and management of each of those departments has control over those particular staff, whether or not they're allocated into different areas.
Yeah, I got that, and that's totally appropriate. So that was one. And on that same page, the finance director, that's you, Manny, you've got only 0.28 of your time, about a quarter of your time under the general fund. And I realize that you also can allocate some of your time to the enterprise accounts, but I kind of think that we're underestimating how much of your time is actually general fund versus how much is those enterprise accounts. And that's sort of, what's the word, convenient for keeping our general fund costs lower, but I don't know if that's actually really accurate that you only spend about a quarter of your time overseeing general fund. I would guess we're shortchanging, or we're not allocating sufficient of your time to the general fund. And I understand the rationale. Yeah. Anyway.
If I might just, if I want you to maybe hear what we're hearing and think outside of maybe what your thoughts are for the moment, but what I'm hearing is that you're questioning the finance manager about the accuracy of his records and kind of accusing, to be perfectly honest, that maybe he's not keeping track of his hours properly. And I'm wondering if maybe that is going a little bit outside the scope of what we should be doing. That's between the city manager and him to justify those numbers. We're the policy makers, so I just want to be real careful that we're not being disrespectful and that we're staying in our lane as policy makers. Sorry.
I just want to jump in here. I just want to jump in here for a little point of clarification. Many in our reorganization of City Hall and staffing responsibilities with the administration department, Manny's going to take on more of the daily responsibility of utility billing up at the front counter. So there's a shift of the general from the enterprise funds there too. So that's basically a big component. So when there's a question with a utility bill, something going on with ACS with the billing aspect of it, with payroll, which also has components back into the enterprise fund, that's where you see that the enterprise fund having a greater contribution to his work focus.
Thank you. I agree. I take to heart both Sabrina's and Brian's explanations there. I don't know that we actually track the hours a whole lot, and I know that in the past our records are not complete on that. But if it's an estimate as opposed to tracking hours, I just want to make sure we're being fair in allocating that time. But I think Brian clarified that there is indeed a big chunk of time in finance director's duties that is allocated to these other funds. So I wanted to raise that question, but okay. I also, on human resources, which is page 22, I wondered if we just have the one human resources person, or whether that's more than one person's time. But there again, that's the other side of the coin. Our HR person clearly also handles all of our staff, which includes many of our employees that are in the enterprise funds. Is that one 100% of her time, or is it her time plus some other time? Because that one is 100% general fund right now. Another question.
So as it pertains to the time that's associated with general fund, there is also another component that's associated with cost allocation. And you will note that on page, let me see here, on page 13, I believe, on page 13, you'll see an overhead admin allocation that's associated with 100, 1,000, 6,300, 0. There's an amount there associated, 539,146. That is an overhead allocation associated with what it costs to be able to maintain those funds. And so this is money coming from other funds like the airport, enterprise, or water that is landing in with the overhead and administration. And so we recoup some of our costs, even though, yes, you were correct, the the HR manager does do stuff outside of the scope of just dealing with general fund items. And how we recoup those costs is not just looking at it from the perspective of how much she costs and her salaries and benefits, but also the costs of the overall department itself. And so when it's an overall cost, we use the cost allocation or overhead administration component in order to be able to recoup those costs. So it's not just for recouping the cost for the FTE of that particular staff member, but also the remaining it's through the finance department, and legal and everything. So basically, it's an overlap.
Okay, thank you. That answers that question. I see Jerry's hand up.
Okay, Manny, can you also point me in the where I would find the amount of money I know we have a contract with the fire department, with some cannabis money over there. Could you tell me where I could find that in the budget?
contract for the fire department. Oh, the cannabis. So that would be under, let me see here. Let me find the exact page for you.
They bill through planning, I guess, or with their services, but we also transfer a certain amount. That's what I'm looking.
Exactly. And that's it. It's under the cannabis section, 1012, and it is on page 33. And we listed under the other contracts section of that particular budget in 100-1012-2081-030. So we basically dispersed it through the other contract section over there. And we expect a decline in those funds, the amount of funding that's going to be coming into cannabis because of the price drop, the immense price drop that has occurred within the sales of that particular industry.
Okay, I just wanted to know where I could find it if I was asked, so thank you, sir.
Yeah, I had the same question, but I have a couple more on pages before then. So on page 29, there's a special departmental expense, which has been at $20,000 budgeted and includes $20,000 for the 22-23 fiscal year and then not. But that item doesn't appear in the line item comments, so I don't know what it was or is. Do you have that? It's 2101-045.
Page 29.
Yeah.
This is on Department 1010 planning, page 101-045, the 20,000.
Right.
I remember this was an ongoing cost associated with the, see if I can find that relatively quick.
This is Community Development Director.
I want to say that was a GIS component, but
Yes. Okay, it should appear in the budget line item comments, and it doesn't. If it's GIS, that's fine. I just think it should appear in the... Okay.
Can council hear me?
Research that. What I understand or what I remember of this, I believe that is a GIS subcomponent. It's either GIS or it's general plan, and it's an appropriation that is carried forward from adopted budget to adopted budget to adopted budget. The change in how we are doing things now is that we will carry over the encumbrance rather than keep reappropriating the same 20,000 year over year over year. It's not, once the year ends, it leaves. And so it improved in prior years. That 20,000 is associated with the prior year amount. I believe that is the GIS component that they're trying to.
It's not accumulating 20,000 per year. It's just been carried over. Okay, well, if
Councilmember Gonzalez?
It sounded like Dusty or somebody was trying to talk very faintly. That's all I want.
Dusty just responded in a text message to that. There you go.
Sure.
Can you turn your volume up, Dusty?
Yeah, I'm trying here.
I can hear you now.
Okay. That budget line that you're referencing, that's just a hold for cost recovery planning projects. So these are projects where money comes in, but we get reimbursed by the applicant. So at the end of the day, it should zero out. I don't know.
Okay, thank you. On page 30, there's building official, code enforcement officer, and then there's also another line for code enforcement officer. Wondered about that on the allocated position.
So, Madge, this budget has programmed in a dedicated code enforcement officer. That is a need that I recognize, and I've heard from other council members that we would be creating a job description and then hopefully do a successful recruitment to bring in an individual to the organization to do code enforcement, work with property owners, work on property inspections, work with education with landowners and property owners and rental managers on the importance of property maintenance issues.
Okay, that explains that. And I agree with that rationale. Thank you. I had the same question that Jerry already brought up regarding the Little Lake Fire Department, so thanks for that clarification. And I don't have too many more. Sorry to do this, but I had all these. One again, this is really picky, but on page 41, regarding police and admin, you have the animal control. I think I mentioned this to Brian. Animal control used to be in a different department, and now it's being moved to police, which I understand. But those 20,000, the amounts shown for the prior 2 years appear both places. It's just a little, bookkeeping to make sure that we aren't double counting them, because they used to be funded on page 57, and now that expense is moving to this police expense. So anyway, it's a minor thing, but just wanted to make sure, Manny.
Yes, I mean, that is just trying to represent the past amounts so you can see it in comparison to, but you're correct. I mean, yeah, it doesn't change the budget for this year or anything like that. The only budget that we are actively entertaining right now is the proposed 22-23 and 23-24 budgets.
Okay.
But I can eliminate those. The difference is that then you'll see 0-0, and then the amounts increase.
Okay. Got it. So it was a convenience for us to know. All right. I noticed that the safety dispatch on page 43 has gone up by about 200,000, and I'm just wondering, and these are comparing with budgeted amounts, not with actual amounts from previous years. Have we increased our staff there?
Once again, there is a programmed into this budget, additional staff person dedicated to dispatch. We are looking at the opportunity to have some redundancy within our dispatch staffing levels. It's difficult to find the right person for that position, and we've been doing some active recruiting and finding some good candidates, but we just want to have the built-in ability in this budget to hire someone, hire additional candidate. If we can go out and grab them and they're interested, to bring them along.
Great. I agree with that.
It's represented also on page 9. You can see the police dispatcher is actually increasing by 2.
Yeah, okay.
Could Councilmember Salas piggyback real quick? Go ahead.
Yeah, actually, it's not about dispatch, it's about animal control. So does the animal control number reflect both the sheriff's department cost and the shelter costs? And is that one happy number?
Yes, and I believe the numbers are split. I believe the capital cost is the cost for the rental, if I am correct on that, and then there's a cost for
well, the way it was done in the past, the sheriff's department billed us for catching them. The shelter billed us for the cost of housing the animals. And then we paid a capital cost based on an agreement we signed years ago, pay for the capital expenditures regarding when the shelter was built. And I think they nail all the municipalities that throw animals in there on the county.
Yeah, and I think the capital cost is associated within 2081, 2022, and the other remaining costs are associated within the 2081, 2021.
Okay, thank you. All right, Matt, your turn.
Okay, thank you. On page 50 and 51, emergency services, we have an extremely small budget for that, and there's no staff time allocated to it. I'm just wondering if we aren't part of, countywide meetings and plans for emergency response. And it says restructure the disaster council. I don't even know what that is. But I do think emergencies are going to be arising. They always seem to. And I wanted to make sure that we have adequate plans. And maybe I brought this up to Brian that, maybe council can get a presentation at some point about how the city works with our other jurisdictions and what our plans are, because that's my question there.
From a budgetary perspective, the planning component of it is listed under the other contract section, and that was at a request from Councilmember Gonzalez. There's also some overtime that's established with it as well, but it's a small amount. In the event of an emergency proclamation would actually then be accompanied with appropriations associated with. Well, a later after the proclamation, a later request to increase appropriations would be then submitted to council for review and approval at that point. We can't predict exactly what type of emergency it would be, so we hold ourselves. We would then find the existing funding probably from a reserve of fund, and then
well, I'm not expecting us to be able to budget our response to an actual emergency, but just ongoing, making sure that we're coordinated with countywide planning for emergencies, and whether that is the staff members assigned to that. That's my question.
If I can, and Madge alluded to it a little bit. We had a conversation late last week explaining the details. We do have a pretty good relationship both with the county DES, the SO's office, if there's in case of an emergency. And then they have their connections both to the state and then to the federal agency FEMA in case there's ever an accident or incident that we all need to respond to. And I think what Manny was explaining was that it's like everyone has said, we don't know when the next disaster is going to be, so we don't really budget a fund for that. Typically what happens is if we have to allocate funds during an emergency event, extra overtime, equipment rentals, equipment hours, we'll just essentially do the quick on-the-fly allocations, and then if it's a severe event, then there are recourses that we can submit our reimbursement claims to both the state and the Fed, depending on the type of event, and that's why it's real important for us to have the reporting mechanism in place for reimbursement, staff time, equipment hours, materials, labor.
So things like the ongoing, just coordinating with those departments is Brian and maybe Kathy's just sort of part of your job. It's not allocated separately in the budget, like a 0.3 of your percent of your time or something. Is that?
I guess it's kind of a shared response right now on a non-emergency event when everything's normal. Chief Lizaraga has contact with DES and the SO office. I have contact with DES. I know that Scott Herman does as well if there's any type of flooding event or perceived flood event. We have that level of communication. It's very informal right now. I know the county is very good in keeping those lines of communication open, because it's good to have them established now when there's non-pressure or the pressure of a pending event. But when we are experiencing something, we will do the best that we can for reporting, documentation of these, are how we expend staff time and resources, and then go through the reimbursement process afterwards.
Great. Okay, this is real minor too. Page 53, the pool operation. We do get revenue from the pool, and I don't see where that's included there. So I'll make sure we
don't.
The
way that is is created or has been maintained over the last few years. The revenue is segmented away from the actual expenses there, but you will see it on page, I believe it's 13, page 13. We have the amounts associated with it. Let's see here. 30. I believe it just runs into the. I'm trying to. Parks and recreation fees, 1050. So this is located right in page 13.
I see. So it's under Parks and Recreation fees. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it would be helpful to see kind of what the balance is right there, the way it is in a few other departments, like, airport. Well, of course, that's an enterprise. But anyway, I wanted to make sure that yeah, it is. These expenses are partially offset by some revenue, and it would be helpful to see what that is. Okay. Page 55. Sorry, I went over this over the weekend, and I just have all these questions. The groundwater project oversight and completion shows up under some other items, but it didn't show up here on page 55 as program goals, but I'm sure that's one of the goals there.
Page 50.
And also ongoingly reporting on the monitoring wells and water quality controls. I just want to make sure that that's among the goals of the Public Works Department. Okay.
So for that particular activity, the funding has been moved over to Fund 450 in order to be able to track and keep those the revenue that's earned separate from the budget. You're talking about the water, the groundwater project.
Yeah, I'm talking about the Elias well groundwater project, not the Park well. This is program goals for the Public Works admin.
Okay. So you're asking us to include that as a goal?
Yes.
It's actually in 5032 on page 96.
I know it's in there. Okay. I know it's in there in other places, but it's certainly one of the high priorities in Public Works in general. So I guess as long as it's in there. And
Councilmember Strong, how many more questions do you think you might have? Just out of curiosity.
I think my one other large question is on the very next page, and I don't think I have too many more.
Okay, just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's so hard to wrap one's head around so many pages. Okay. On Public Works Administration, page 56, the Public Works Director time doesn't show up there. Is that allocated to a bunch of other items later on in there? Because I didn't really see it allocated there.
Yes, the Public Works Director allocated it to various other departments along with the, you'll see him allocated a little bit within the other departments. I believe, let's see here. A lot of his time is represented within the water and sewer funds. But I believe there was some part of it that was in, they're freezing up on me. My apologies.
Yeah, I don't see it in any of the general fund Public Works items. Any allocation of his time, and that I'm sure there is some of his time spent on general fund. I think it might just be an oversight. So that was sort of a substantive, that could be a substantive item if indeed it just isn't in there. And I really would like that clarified before we finalize a budget. And I think the other questions I have, I could probably just talk to Manny separately. That another place where there's a budget item that doesn't show up in the comments of that. And I think that's about it. Yeah, I don't want to take everybody's time unnecessarily here. But I want to make sure.
But do you feel like you've had sufficient questions answered? I know we've been asking questions for a little over an hour or so. Do you feel like you've got the of yours answered, or is there anything that's important you want to ask?
I have one other important question, and this is something we'll have to deal with. That is on the Water Enterprise Fund. I show us having a really big deficit virtually this year, next year, and the next year, and obviously we can't sustain that, so I'm assuming we're going to be scheduling a rate analysis on that, because we show almost $1 million per year loss in that fund. And that's a substantive one, and I think that's about it.
I believe you're. Sorry, I'm trying to load up the staffing allocation right now to answer your question on exactly where the superintendent is. Just my computer is fairly slow at opening this up at the moment. Give me 1 second here, and I can answer your first.
Manuel, while you're looking that up, I believe Councilmember Gonzalez wanted to add a comment.
Yeah, this may be more for Fabian, Chief Mazaraga, but I noticed as I was skimming through that Fund 100 state cops, we have a police officer position, full-time FTE, and for both 22-23 and 22-24, in the past, that hadn't amounted to enough money to cover a police officer. And so I was curious if the cops pass-through, I know it comes from collected by the state, goes to the county, and then handed to us under state cops. I know in the past I funded a CSO because I didn't think it technically covered an officer. Are we getting that much money from state cops now that we can bank on an officer, or should that be part of an FTE as opposed to full? Just curious.
Well, the grant that was allocated for that position was for the officer, so we're still looking to get that funding back for the officer position.
No, that's not my question, Chief. So the grant that you're talking about is the federal COPS grant. This is the state Citizens Option for Police Services account under 100. And so we have it as Police Officer 1 COPS grant. Technically, it's not a COPS grant. This should be state COPS pass-through money. And that's why some of the language is left over from what we used to do is the CSO would help with transports, and it would fund. When the money first came in, we were actually funding an officer, but then as prices went up, we figured out we couldn't fund an officer out of this money, and it basically went to fund part of a CSO towards the end. And I'm just wondering if you have a full FTE here, whether that's enough for an FTE from the state COPS money.
Are you asking if we're going to look at funding a CSO position for that?
No, my question is what are we getting from state COPS? And is that enough for a police officer? Otherwise, we're basically funding a position that we're not getting all the money.
I'm not sure how much we're getting from state cops. That would be something that I have to get with Manny together on and see if we are getting that funding from the state, then see what the best use of that would be. And if it's only fund a CSO, I'm certainly open to that.
Yeah, because what used to happen is that it gave us, it used to be in the amount of $100 grand. Was every city got at least $100 grand. I think LA got like 500 grand. And then later on, during some of the switcheroos back and forth with the state, what would happen is that they took where the money came from, and instead of coming from the legislature directly, I want to say it came from DMV and taken back and added back, etc. So the amount never came in as a full amount. It actually came in throughout the year in kind of waves, and it's been sometimes right around 100, sometimes $102, etc. But it's definitely not enough to fund a full-time police officer.
Yeah, the 100 grand amount sounds familiar to me for some reason. But,
yeah. So again, I know that
what we can do with that.
That's my only concern, that if you have a full-time FTE associated with that, and again, that's different. I know in the text it has police officer 1 cops grant, and it's not a cops grant. It's a different sort of funding, and so that shouldn't be confused with the federal cops grant.
Okay.
So that would be my question or statement or whatever, but I don't know if that's going to be enough for a police officer.
Yeah. I would agree if that's the amount that we would be getting. That's not nearly enough. So we'll look at it and see if like I said, obviously if it can fund a CSO position, that would be something that would be a tremendous help for us as well.
All right, we'll turn it back over for Manuel.
Yeah, okay, so to answer the question for the Public Works Director position, it is divided into 4 different categories, 4 different operations or funds or departments, which one of them is, they're all enterprise funds. So one is septic receiving, the other is the enterprise airport, wastewater operations, and wastewater and water plant operations. And that is an allocation that was carried forward from the prior year, which appears to be carried forward from the year prior to that. So, in looking back at this, if I'm looking at this correctly, I just carried over the numbers for what was going on in prior years. So, I didn't look at that particular section to see whether or not there was a change or use of any different funds necessary.
What are the tasks that the Public Works Department does that are general fund? It seems like there should be at least a little bit of admin time on that.
Park maintenance, park administration.
And roads, I know there's gas tax and that, but it's still general fund.
Correct.
So anyway, that's what.
I was trying to interpret this.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to clarify if that should be rethought. Doesn't have to be before we adopt the budget, but to look at make sure that our Public Works Director has at least some oversight of those activities.
I believe the oversight is there. The issue is whether or not the costs are attributed correctly over to the general fund associated with that oversight. And that could be something that we can address during the year in order to be able to recover those costs or to add a little bit more to the general fund to cover those costs if so need be.
Thank you. And that would be consistent with the Measure K funding as well, because that's one of the things that we emphasize. And then Brian, I think especially, what about the Water Enterprise Fund the fact that we're, or maybe it's Scott also, but what about the deficit?
My understanding of it is that when you see the over allocation is that those are projects that are programmed. Some of those projects are kind of transferred from year to year, budget cycle to budget cycle, with the expectation that they would be done. And you know, they do not get scheduled due to staffing or trying to line up consultants, or they're connected to another phase project, and we go through that. So it's basically, and I remember having this discussion with Manny before we were putting the budget together, why there's a deficit in that water fund. It's basically just a carryover of projects. We have projects. We overcounted the number of projects based off the available funds to accomplish them. So it's not like we're going to hit the ground running and wipe our books clear of all the delineated projects. We just don't do that. We don't have the means. So that's kind of one element there. And what was communicated to the council during the earlier budget forum is that we would like to do a rate increase study early next year. The reason or the rationale for that is we haven't done one. The one that was done and would allow us to, the rate study basically goes away at the end of this month, this fiscal year. So we would have to look at a new one for the next several years running. We all experience inflation, materials, labor, consultant fees are going up, and at least what we need to do is have fees that correspond to the inflationary tracks that are everyone's experience. And so when we do have to do projects, materials and labor are being priced at 2022, 23 fiscal numbers, inflationary numbers, not something that was maybe 2017 2018 rates.
I think we, in the past, have contracted out that rate study. Is that something we should be including in this budget?
Correct. I believe it was programmed in.
It is included in there.
Thank you very much. Thanks for taking the time to answer all those questions.
We were getting back to the rates. We were hoping to try to do one before the end of the current rate increase study that we had. We just didn't get to it. So we're thinking the logic is that start at the start of January, February time period, and run from there.
All right. I think we're at the point where we can entertain a motion, and then I'll ask for public comment. Would anybody like to make a motion?
I'll move.
Are you moving to adopt the budget?
We are.
I'll second it.
I'll second.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second on the table. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address us on this proposed budget? I don't see anything in the chat, and having heard no comments from the public, I'll bring it back to council and call for the vote.
Councilmember Strong.
Thank you. I think I'm going to reluctantly vote no. I am satisfied that we have a good plan, and we've improved the project document greatly, but there's still quite a few loose ends in my mind that I'd rather have been able to pin down before adoption. I certainly am not against this budget at all, but I would rather vote no reluctantly.
Councilmember Gonzalez.
Yes, so I know that we'll take care of those minutia details.
Connie.
Yes.
Stransky.
Yes.
Mayor Rodriguez.
Yes. All right, I'd like to thank the city staff for all the hours they put into this budget and for being available to council members on evenings and weekends for questions. I know we reached out to you quite a bit on off time, and I do appreciate your availability. And with that, we will adjourn. It is 10:51. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.